This is History for Cocktail Parties with hack historians Thornton Kennedy and James Ottley.
Welcome back to History for Cocktail Parties. My name is Thornton Kennedy, and I'm joined here by our fearless host, James Ottley. How you doing today, James?
Doing great, man. How about yourself?
I'm excited to get into episode 2 on Joseph P. Kennedy, the patriarch
of the Kennedy family, the dynasty.
Yeah, so this is episode 2. Why don't we go over a little bit of what we did on the first episode just to catch people up?
Yeah, just to catch folks up. We covered Joe's early life, how his dad was an influential politician, how he eked his way into Harvard, maybe with some strings, or probably with some strings pulled, used his influence to get a varsity letter on the baseball team. If you haven't listened to that episode, we recommend you go back and do so. Got some good stuff in there. Also talked about how he had this meteoric rise in terms of his success, his ability to just turn anything into gold. Made a killing in the stock market.
Right.
Thornton talked a little bit about that right before the crash.
Everybody went broke. Joe Kennedy got wealthy.
He got rich, indeed. And we had a little bit of controversy back and forth about whether he was involved in bootlegging or not. Different sources say different things.
Makes for a great story.
Indeed. But before we get into episode 2 or 2 far along, I want to again thank our corporate sponsor, Play LLC. You know, because business is serious, but who wants serious, stodgy marketing? Check out our friends at Play, a full-service advertising agency. They're deep in the mix with AI and digital know-how, driving more people to your door. And whether it's IRL, in real life, or virtual, Play ensures the right people find you and buy what you're selling. See their many case studies at goplaydesign.com. That's goplaydesign.com. And start growing your business today.
Thank you so much to Play. Great partnership. We're so thrilled to have them as part of the History for Cocktail Parties family. So I think we left off with the bootlegging, the rum running, if you will. But he makes Joe P. Kennedy, the senior member of the Kennedy family, the father of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Teddy Kennedy. He makes an interesting business move in the 1920s, which is that he organizes a group to purchase 31 theaters in New England. And he's purchasing these formerly vaudevillian stages. And it's because he knows that these are going to be made into movie theaters.
He's really good about kind of seeing the future and knowing what's going to sell next.
Correct. So he makes this move. He buys a bunch of theaters, and he realizes that he owns the theaters and he wants to make them into movie theaters, but that Hollywood is where the power is. And even though he owns the theaters, that he's going to get squeezed by these power brokers out west. So what does Joe do?
Well, one thing he does, and this is kind of an interesting story, in the late 1920s, there was a guy named Alexander Pontages who, if hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right, if I'm slaughtering it.
Fact check us in the comments.
Yeah, I apologize. But he was a Greek guy, balding man with heavy black eyebrows. That's important in a minute. He was a true Horatio Alger type. As a boy, he had shined shoes, sold newspapers, saved up his money, and when he had enough money, bought a rundown theater in Seattle. And he branched out. It was a vaudeville theater, just like you talked about, and he branched out to movies. Eventually, he owned 60 theaters, including the Art Deco Hollywood Pontages in Hollywood. And by 1929, he was worth $30 million.
Good Lord.
Yeah, so Joe makes an offer to buy the Pontages chain, but Pontages turns him down, not just once, but 3 times. And Joe doesn't like to be told no.
No one tells Joe no.
That's exactly right. And so Pontages started to find that he was being denied first-run blockbuster films from major studios, but that was just the beginning. On August 9th, 1929, 17-year-old Eunice Pringle, wearing a low-cut dress, came screaming out of the janitor's broom closet at one of Pontages' theaters, saying, "God, keep him away from me, don't let him touch me," pointing at Pontages and saying that, man, he tried to rape me, and there was a trial. They went to trial, he was charged, he was found guilty.
Unbelievable.
He was sentenced to 50 years in jail.
Unreal.
And So that in those days, his bushy eyebrows and thick accent, didn't help him with the jury. And so it was appealed. There was a retrial, and at the retrial, the jury acquitted him. But by this time, his business had plummeted. And a few months after that, Joe made another offer. The last offer Joe had made was $8 million, but he was forced to take this last offer from Joe for $3.5 million.
I mean, it's such brutal tactics.
Indeed.
But it's 100% in keeping in how he conducts himself.
It is. Well, it gets worse. 2 years.
Somehow.
2 years after the acquittal, Pringle told lawyers that she wanted to come clean.
Oh, my Lord. Really?
Yeah. And stories began to circulate that she was about to blow the lid off the whole thing. And then suddenly, she died.
You're kidding.
I'm not.
Unreal.
Yes, of unknown causes. And the night that she died, she was violently ill. She was red in color, a sign of cyanide poisoning. And on her deathbed, wow, she confessed to her mother and a friend that Joe had set up Pontages and that had paid her $10,000 for her perjured testimony, and also promised to make her a movie star. It turns out that no autopsy was done, and so nobody could prove anything. But that's Joe ended up with these theaters, and that's the story behind it.
And when you talk about making her into a movie star, after acquiring these theaters, like I said, he knew that Hollywood was going to squeeze, so he goes into film production.
Right on.
And he starts making B movies, and he's putting together this company called Film Booking Office, which is going to be a second tier studio. It's not the Meyer Goodwin, not one of the big ones. It'll be a second tier studio, and so he needs to raise money.
Okay.
For this studio, so he goes to England, goes to jolly old England, to raise some money. But the English bankers would not let him into the door. He could not get any traction. Breakfast the next morning, Kennedy hears this rumor that the Prince of Wales is enjoying a brief vacation in Paris, France. So he jumps up from the table. He's like, we're going to Paris. Just insane. Yeah. And he knows that the prince's favorite restaurant is Maxim's.
Okay.
I have no idea what Maxim's is.
All right.
But next time I'm in Paris,
I'm
going to find Maxim's because it's such a great story. So Kennedy goes to the maitre d'. He passes the maitre d' a couple of dollars. The maitre d' seats him at a table next to the prince. As he's sitting there enjoying his lunch, he makes eye contact.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
He flashes that 1,000-watt smile, that old Kennedy charm. And he tells the future king that I really enjoyed meeting you at that reception at the exclusive Myopa Hunt Club back in the previous summer. And the Prince of Wales is like, oh, of course, it's good to see you, old friend. And they just immediately hit it off. And so they have this conversation. They fall into it. And Joe tells the prince that, he's here on business, but he just can't get any meetings.
Let me ask you one question. Had he actually met the prince before?
No, that's the capstone. I mean, that's the most amazing part of the story is he made the whole thing up, knowing that there's this massive receiving line of hundreds and hundreds of people,
right?
And there's no way you could be able to discern whether you had actually met someone at something like that. And Kennedy was smart enough to play that risk, play the odds, if you will.
Pretty brilliant move on his part, I guess.
He did. So the outcome of the story is that the Prince of Wales gives him letters of introduction at all the banks in England, and he goes in and makes enough money to acquire this film studio, and he ends up closing the deal. He put up $200,000, but raised an additional roughly $800,000 to purchase a $1 million theater.
A lot of money back then.
It was a lot of money. He did really really well for himself. He worked with a lot of very famous actors, and he was in business to really make money. So he starts formulating these other companies, and he works under RCA. But most importantly, he caught gold ring when he engineers the merger of FBO, which is the company he founded, and a company called KAO, creating RKO, Radio Keith Orpheum.
Yeah, we've all heard of that.
It's every microphone from the 1920s and 1930s has that insignia on it, the RKO insignia.
Right.
So it's a big deal. He received $2 million and doubled that. into the exercise of his options. He had arrived in Hollywood, not quite a millionaire, but he walks out with $5 million.
That's amazing.
I know.
I think that a lot of people maybe have heard the story that, he was a bootlegger, or he made some money, after, in stocks or whatnot. I don't think a lot of people know that he made, would you say, most of his money or a good portion of it in the movie business?
By the end of 1930, which is, 1929 stock market crash, he makes a bunch of money. He goes out to Hollywood. So at the end of 1930, he has a fortune of $10 million. Which is about $150 million in today's dollars.
So definitely one of the richest.
One of the wealthiest people in the country by far.
Right.
And, we said this during the bootlegging episode, but his motivation in making all this money was not pure greed and capitalism. He wanted to leave a bunch of money to his family. And he wanted his family to go into public service. He wanted to go into public service. And he knew that you needed a lot of money in order to go into that. So,
kind of the next step. I mean, a lot of people, I think, also don't realize that he is pretty much responsible for Franklin Roosevelt being in office. Kind of an interesting story there. It might have been one of his most significant and maybe most overlooked achievements in American politics. This was his behind-the-scenes efforts to secure the nomination for FDR at the Democratic Convention of 1932. I guess he made all this money. He was an important guy. He, spent time with important people. And one of those people was William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate.
Right.
And Hearst at that point owned 33 newspapers. And he was friends with Joe. And Joe apparently gave him financial advice. And I read a quote that said they also shared a fondness for illicit affairs. But anyway, so in the 1932 Democratic Convention, through his influence, Hearst controlled 86 convention delegates, and Hearst was an isolationist. He was opposed to the League of Nations, which was the forerunner of the UN, and Hearst supported a guy named John Nance Garner of Texas to be the Democratic nominee.
Cactus Jack.
And because of
his
Texas,
nickname.
all right.
Yes.
So he had already sent this glowing biography to all his newspapers. Was really promoting this guy Garner, Cactus Jack. But Garner had no chance of winning. The votes that were going to be cast for him, it was basically going to be a deadlock.
Right.
But Hearst was okay with that because he knew that would prevent Roosevelt.
And the standard bearer was Al Smith, right? He was the guy. That
I don't know.
So it was between Gardner and Smith. Those were the two guys. Roosevelt was a distant third.
Okay.
But they were kind of.
But by supporting Garner, he knew that Roosevelt wouldn't have a chance.
Right. Roosevelt was way out.
Yeah. Hearst was not a Roosevelt fan. And so the way I read it was that at this impasse at the convention, they trotted out another guy, Newton Baker, who was the Secretary of War under Woodrow Wilson. He was being trotted out to break the impasse. And Hearst hated this guy, Baker, more so than Roosevelt or Al Smith. And so Joe went out there and met with Hearst and convinced him. He said, look, Roosevelt would be better than Baker. And so he convinced Hearst to swing his votes to Roosevelt. And as a result, Roosevelt got the nomination and, of course, won the election, won the presidency. And the New Deal era, in a large part, can be attributed to, Joe's behind-the-scene efforts,
And I do think you have to credit Roosevelt, at least in the book I read, which is called The Dark Side of Camelot by Seymour Hersh, indicates that Roosevelt had a lot of sway over Joe Kennedy. I don't know if Joe Kennedy was just enamored with the Roosevelt name, or what that was. That probably was part of it.
Or maybe he saw Roosevelt as having, perhaps being the guy that could bring him the most benefit if he got elected. Right,
because he does give FDR $25,000 in that race, which is a good deal of money. He also made another $50,000 donation to the Democratic Party, and he raised another $100,000. So he had a lot of skin in the game for Roosevelt when it was highly likely that Roosevelt was not going to get the nomination.
Well, it was a good bet. It worked out for him.
It worked out incredibly well for him.
We talked about, that Joe maybe did not have some interest in the liquor business during Prohibition. He certainly got into it afterwards. He actually got the government. Well, this I think it is proven that, or known and documented that during Prohibition, and which lasted, if I'm not mistaken, up through 1933.
Sounds right.
Okay. He did get permission from the government, maybe through this Roosevelt influence, to import ridiculously large quantities of Hague and
Right.
Scotch and Dewar's Scotch as medicine for medicinal purposes. Sound familiar? And
That's
so
crazy.
and so he was able to stockpile in these warehouses that he had all this medicine, so that when he knew it was going to become legal, he knew that was just around the corner.
Right.
And so when it did become legal, Joe would have a corner on the market. He was, he made a lot of money on that as well, and that was because of the influence that he had with the administration.
Well, and the administration specifically through FDR's son, James, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean, he really kind of trotted out. It's almost like some other political dynasties we know, where
Yep.
you bring the son out and you're like, hey, look, his dad's the president of the United States, and
Yeah.
suddenly you're hobnobbing
Right.
with all these people.
Right. Joe, I think, pursued him. I think he saw in James Roosevelt, FDR's son,
Correct.
a perfect opportunity. James Roosevelt was actually described as kind of a greedy, dim-witted,
Sorry. Keep going.
and unethical, balding, pen-headed man.
Oh, my Lord.
That's in quotes. I didn't come
That
up
is
with
not
that
a James
myself.
Ottley original.
No.
That is from someone else.
Absolutely. And apparently James Roosevelt was a constant embarrassment to the president.
Yeah.
So,
And wasn't he a womanizer as well?
oh, he was.
He had
In fact,
all kinds of stuff.
one of the ways that Joe, kept James in his pocket was by supplying him with a steady supply of chorus girls, and in addition to promising 25% cut of the liquor business that James helped him get into, and so James Roosevelt, he helped in the process, helped Joe get into the legal liquor
Right.
business or distributing business. After Prohibition, Joe takes Jimmy or James to England on
Yeah.
a cruise with him to lunch with the head of this Distillers Company or Distillers Company Limited, so that they could see that, oh wow, he's kind of like you said,
Right.
He's in business with the president's son, so
which
he
is
must
a direct line to the president.
right. And so, as a result of that, this cruise and taking Jimmy with him, Joe is granted the exclusive agent in the U.S. for Hague Scotch, Gordon's Dry Gin, and Dewar's White Label Scotch.
God, I love Dewar's. My dad was a big Dewar's drinker, and that was when as soon as I got of age, that I was like, Dewar's and soda. Like, I thought I was so cool. It tasted terrible, but now
I can see you ordering a Dewar's neat.
Dewar's neat. I
At
know,
the
I was
bar.
so weak. So that is actually Somerset Distributors. That's the name of his company. And you talked about Somerset at the beginning of episode 1. The name of the company was Somerset, which, of course, in James Ottley classic fashion, he made the connection to Camelot because, remind me?
Because one of the mythical places one of the places that mythical Camelot was supposedly based on was Somerset Castle. And
That's
I
crazy.
can't recall the other one, but I think it's just this weird coincidence.
It's such a great coincidence.
Yeah.
But again, this is about Joe Kennedy spinning gold. He made a modest investment of $100,000. His Somerset Distributors returned $250,000 a year. And then in 1946, when the whole company became a political embarrassment and he had to exit, he sold it for $8 million. Investment of $100,000.
Wow.
Exits, 13 years later for $8 million.
Kudos to him. And liquor and the movie business, that wasn't the only thing he made money on. He was also a real estate investor. He made
the Chicago thing. I forgot.
Let's talk about it.
It's crazy.
And I think that's one of those things that I think that people in general, that's in the zeitgeist, if
Right.
you will.
Well done.
That people know that the Kennedys owned the Merchandise Mart or the Chicago Merchant Mart,
Which was the largest commercial building in the country. Huge.
Absolutely. 4 million square feet of floor space when it was built. I even read that it might have been the world's largest.
World's
largest.
It
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah. And so, Interesting story behind that. It was the brainchild, but it was built by the Marshall Field and Company.
Wow.
In 1930 for $35 million.
And by the way, Marshall Field's one of those original
Yes!
members of Jekyll Island.
I love making
If you
these
have not
connections.
listened to our Jekyll Island episodes, please go back and listen to them.
Those were great episodes.
Those were great.
Indeed.
Not to pat ourselves too much.
But worth listening to for sure. So anyway, Marshall Field and Company decides at some point that they're going to divest themselves of this building. At the time that they put it up for sale, apparently they had a lot of government space, or at least a lot of the space was leased to the government. The rents weren't too high, and so they decided to go ahead and sell it. On their books, it was only worth, at that time, $21 million. Joe ends up being able to buy it, this is in 1945, for almost $13 million. It's an exact figure, actually, $12,956,516.
Unbelievable.
I don't know how he came up with that figure, how they landed on that. But anyway, and he borrowed 12.5 of that, so almost all of it, from the Equitable Life Assurance Society, which the CEO of that company also had a cottage on Jekyll.
Wait.
Wait. Yes.
All these connections.
Indeed. So, and another weird thing, I didn't dig into this, but it was at this point that Joe hired R. Sergeant Shriver to actually,
Shrivers?
yeah, to manage the building for him, and which was weird because he was an editor or assistant editor at Newsweek. But anyway, bring him into the fold. But the interesting part of the story, I think, is how Joe learned of the sale, and he learned about the sale from a friend of his named James Lee, who was a local real estate investor who was actually about to buy the building. And he just mentioned to Joe in passing, like, listen to this great deal I'm about to get. And I think that's one thing that you did not do in front of Joe Kennedy, is mentioning a good deal that you were about to get, but did not yet see, cross the finish line on. So Joe goes behind his back, apparently, and buys the building. And James Lee was ticked off about this, for the rest of his life. Interestingly, stuff all comes back around. James Lee was the maternal grandfather of Jacqueline Lee Bouvier.
No.
Yes.
What?
And so
insane.
Yes. And apparently he almost did not attend the wedding 8 years later.
Would you? I mean, you got screwed out of so much money on that real estate, and you gave it to Joe Kennedy.
Yeah, you just told him
accidentally.
Right.
Didn't even realize that this swarmy little dude was going to run around behind your back.
Swarmy, but charming.
Charming, I'm sorry. He had the 30,000-watt smile.
Yeah.
The other interesting component of Chicago to me, and this is, again, in Dark Side of Camelot, is this is where a lot of those gangster connections are made.
Okay.
Because the gangsters had salons at that same building, so there was some crossover with his business interest in the mafia. And he became very close with a lot of those mafia people, not necessarily because they were bootlegging, but because they were in business together.
Well, and that would help explain, the story of, like, if the bootlegging wasn't true.
How did we make all these connections?
Right.
So he had a ton of relationships with really big, powerful mafioso people. I am not going to attempt to pronounce any of these names because they are way too Italian for me. The Frank Sinatra, that's another one of those mafia connections, is that he's very close with Frank Sinatra. And that is because of the Hollywood connection.
Okay.
So out in Hollywood, he becomes good friends with Frank Sinatra.
The father does. Joseph Kennedy?
Joseph P. Kennedy.
Okay, that we're talking
friends with him, and it's through his daughter marries a producer out there, and they have these big parties. That's how John F. Kennedy meets Marilyn Monroe, is through these parties.
Okay.
So that's how all these rumors kind of percolate through the dad, through the patriarch.
Right.
They come all the way down to JFK and Bobby, and there's this famous story we'll get to eventually upon JFK's assassination, where Bobby's first instinct is to check on the mafia, and to see if the mafia may have been involved,
right,
as his brother's right hand.
Yeah.
First suspicion was, let's call our friends. Who have the pull to do this. So one of the ramifications of him getting Roosevelt elected to president is that he assumes, as one would, after giving this much money and really getting him to elected president of the United States,
got him the nomination,
that he would get a cabinet post. And so he sadly sits by the phone. He's waiting for it to ring. It does not ring. He assumes he's going to get the Treasury Secretary job. It goes first to William Wooden and then to Henry Morgenthau Jr. So he gets bypassed for that. He gets bypassed for another And so it's a little bit of a problem that Joe really wasn't anticipating a good position. But what he gets named to, of course, is the secretary, the first head of the SEC.
Right.
The Security and Exchange Commission, which had literally just been founded.
1934.
Yeah, so he is the first head of the SEC. And the press just lowered both barrels at Roosevelt because Kennedy made all of his money by not cheating, because it wasn't illegal at the time.
But slightly unethical.
By pumping and dumping or advertising
That's right.
stocks, and then once they reached a certain amount, pulling them out from underneath people and walking away from the 1929 crash wealthy.
I think a lot of people thought this was like putting the fox in the hen house.
It 100% was putting the fox in the hen house.
Didn't you have a quote about...
The FDR quote, so when they finally reach FDR and they're like, why on earth would you name this person? And he says, to catch a thief, you lay a thief.
Right.
And amazingly, and maybe this speaks to a little bit of the character of Joe Kennedy that we haven't gotten into, we've talked about how swarmy and how, he just seems like he's always in the right place, the right time to make a bunch of money. He actually passes effective regulation and establishes some real barriers and some guardrails.
There's no documented, evidence or that he used his position for personal gain. It was maybe one of the times where everybody's like, wow, this actually was a good idea.
And didn't you say that there were a lot of really incredible people on that committee as well? So it wasn't just him.
Yeah.
Roosevelt put some really smart people around him.
Right.
Maybe they had eyes on him, but I tend to think, I'm an idealist.
Yeah.
I'm an optimist. I tend to think that Joe Kennedy got in there and actually knew how to cheat the system.
Right. There
and
you go.
Knew how he had made all that money.
Right.
And he actually said, I think you might have been referencing this, that he was making so much money in the 1920s that he said, we better make money quick before they make laws making it illegal.
Before they make it illegal.
So he knew that this was too good.
He knew the game, and therefore he knew how to regulate it.
He knew the game, and he knew how to regulate it. And I don't know how he went from SEC to the British ambassadors. Is that Roosevelt's second term, or?
That's a good question. I think that he, like Joe, had a history of doing a job for a year or so and then getting bored of it and then wanting to do something
Probably
else.
What happened at the shipyards.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so I believe that he was pressing Roosevelt for this ambassadorship to England.
Because he had all those connections. He had those business connections.
Right.
Also, he always had kind of a chip on his shoulder. He didn't make the big clubs at Harvard. He felt like the people looked down on him, and he knew that if he were the ambassador to Great Britain, it was the most prestigious office you could get.
Right.
Also, you made the point, Roosevelt and Kennedy were rivals.
That's right, because he wanted his seat.
Right.
At one point,
and,
you talked about,
and Roosevelt was no dummy.
Right. Yeah, he. There's a great quote. This was earlier in time, but Lincoln's was Seward. Yeah. So it was Seward. Said that some persons are sent abroad because they're needed, and others are sent away because they're not wanted at home. And so a lot of people said, well, that's why he got the ambassadorship. So, he could be, Roosevelt could keep an eye on him, but, he wouldn't be, competing with Roosevelt to try and, run for president.
Right. And then what ends up happening? So first, when Joe Kennedy gets to England, I think they had a number of children. I want to say 9.
I think he took all 9 over there.
All 9 over there.
Yeah.
They were all really good-looking kids. His wife is beautiful. He's got that smile. He's got that charm. The British press just fall in love with him and the kids.
At first.
They are just all over the place, and it really works out well for Kennedy. And then
for a while.
Well, what happens really is that Neville Chamberlain, he becomes very close to Neville Chamberlain, who was the prime minister at the time, because he knew how to build those relationships. And then Hitler starts rearing his ugly head.
He does.
And Neville Chamberlain is very much
an appeaser. And he is known for that term, appeasement. And what Neville Chamberlain was trying to do was to, keep peace in our time. In fact, that's the quote, the famous quote that he said, I believe it is peace in our time. When he basically gave Hitler, he signed this agreement in 1938 in Munich, and he ceded the entire Sudetenland, which is nearly 1/3 of Czechoslovakia, to Germany. And he did it to appease Hitler, but, he thought that war was just terrible. I guess he didn't know that at that point, or at least historians now look back and say and try to justify Chamberlain by saying that Chamberlain did not know that Hitler was a madman at that point. Yeah. Obviously, no one would have dealt with him if they knew at that point there was a madman. And so Joe Kennedy was in favor of this as well. And so he supported Chamberlain's appeasement policy.
And for Joe Kennedy, if I can step on your lines real quickly, put a pin where you are.
Yep.
He believed that war was a disaster economically.
Right.
He really didn't care about the principles.
Right.
And he may have been an anti-Semite, by the way, but he really thought that war was going to cost everyone a lot of money.
Including himself.
Yep. Including Great Britain. So for him, it was more of an economic decision.
Right.
And he hatches... Anyways, go on with Neville Chamberlain and the speech.
He did say to the Czech, and this was not very, very eloquent, but he said to the Czech ambassador in London after Chamberlain had signed this agreement, he said, "Isn't this wonderful? Now I can get back to Palm Beach after all."
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, that wasn't very sensitive. But one thing that's kind of interesting, jumping forward in history to the JFK assassination, there was a person that showed up on the Zapruder film who opened an umbrella at the time that the presidential limousine passed by. And they called this guy, they did track him down, but they called him the Umbrella Man. And folks that are really into the JFK conspiracy deal are know this guy, the Umbrella Man. And when they did track him down and they, asked him, interrogated him and said, "Look, were you trying to send a signal, to the shooter,
to...
And he said, "Absolutely not. I was trying to make a political statement." I said, what? And so apparently when Chamberlain came back in 1938, got off the plane, he had a large black umbrella with him. And the black umbrella came to be a symbol of Chamberlain, a symbol of appeasement. And so when and it was, obviously Neville Chamberlain was connected to Kennedy. And so when the Umbrella Man opened his umbrella as the presidential limousine passed by, he said he was making a political statement against Kennedy and his father and against appeasement by opening this black umbrella.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
Isn't that wild?
I know. Who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it took them a while.
You only learn that on History for Cocktail Parties.
That's exactly right.
You find that nowhere else.
Indeed. Joe also had some, his reputation in England, I think, was also sullied by once the bombs started to be dropped. You want to tell us about that?
Well, I just know that there was a sentiment that was, one gentleman said, "I thought my daisies were yellow until I saw Joe Kennedy." He fled out of London and lived in the countryside. He did not want to get hit by a bomb. He couldn't, and to your point on Palm Beach, he really could not get out of there fast enough. He really feared the bombers that were constantly blowing up London. So he was not well loved. But when the British people, when the Londoners are having to deal with that constant chaos, and the U.S. ambassador
is hiding somewhere else,
and the U.S. is not involved with the war, the U.S. is staying on the sidelines, and Churchill says, we are in trouble until the U.S. comes off the sideline. All Churchill's doing after Chamberlain is replaced is just buying time to get the U.S. in. And because Kennedy is such an appeaser, Delano Roosevelt, FDR, starts just leaving him out of communications. Yeah. He sets up a separate network to communicate with the British government, and Joe Kennedy is completely cut out.
Yeah. Well, Joe also didn't make any friends. Before he left, he did two other things that kind of ticked people off. Right before England started using some of its had to start using its merchant marine for military shipment. And so this meant that goods and products, for just regular commercial use could not be shipped to the U.S. or other places on British ships. But somehow, and this included Joe's liquor shipments,
Right.
And so Joe, using his influence, was able to actually get room on these merchant marine ships for his liquor shipments that, probably should have been used for military purposes.
Why does that not surprise me?
One last thing that he did that was, again, not really in the team spirit. When right before Czechoslovakia fell, Joe had these, he shorted stock and bonds of the Czech government, and so he made a bunch of money on Czech securities on selling them short I mean, I guess people could see that coming, but Joe made money on it. It wasn't illegal, but just, not something that the ambassador probably should be doing.
Right. And so when he gets back to, I don't know if FDR calls him back or if he just heads back to America, but FDR has a come to Jesus with him, and he's like, I'm no longer going to serve in this position. You're taking the country to war. This is bad. And Joe knew the British economy, and he knew that Great Britain could not continue. They were going to go broke. So he wanted out of England badly. And then he made this statement to the press that this was the death of democracy in England. England would not survive this. And that really turned the entire country. Yeah. Not only did it destroy his reputation in England, it ended his political life.
Right.
And that was it. Once the U.S. goes into World War II, and not only do we go into World War II, but we have tremendous success, and it becomes a rallying and identifying moment for our country. And Joe Kennedy is over there saying,
we're not going to win.
We're not going to win. This is over. Appease Hitler.
Right.
That was it.
Indeed.
So I think that takes us to the end of episode 2, my man.
Absolutely.
Well done.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to History for Cocktail Parties with hack historians James Ottley and Thornton Kennedy. Please like and subscribe, and now that the episode's over, you can go pour yourself another round, and we'll catch you next time.